The rain hammered against Marcus Chen's combat visor as he pressed his back against the crumbling stone wall. His rifle felt heavy in his hands, not from its weight, but from the knowledge that every shot counted. The human expeditionary force had been cut off from their main convoy 3 days ago, trapped in this alien city that looked like something from Earth's medieval period, if Earth's medieval period had been designed by beings with 6 arms and a fondness for crystalline architecture. The Cathari had been relentless in their pursuit. These weren't the civilized Cathari that humanity had first made contact with 6 months ago. These were the traditionalists, the ones who believed that any contact with alien species was an abomination that needed to be cleansed with fire and blade. They fought with weapons that seemed primitive by human standards, bows that fired energy-charged arrows, bladed weapons that could cut through most human armor, and a ferocity that reminded Marcus of the old stories his grandfather used to tell about ancient Earth warriors. Marcus adjusted his position and peered around the corner. The street beyond was a maze of overturned merchant stalls and debris from the fighting. Somewhere in the distance, he could hear the distinctive whine of human plasma rifles mixing with the war cries of the Cathari warriors. His squad had been separated during the last assault, and now he was alone in enemy territory with nothing but his training and his determination to find a way back to his people. A movement caught his eye. At first, he thought it might be another Cathari warrior trying to flank his position, but as he focused his scope, he realized it was much smaller. A child. A Cathari child, no more than what would be equivalent to 6 or 7 years old in human terms, was crouched behind an overturned cart about 50 meters away. The little being had the characteristic blue-gray skin of her species and the large, luminous eyes that made them appear almost ethereal. But right now, those eyes were wide with terror. Marcus cursed under his breath. This was exactly the kind of situation they had been warned about during their cultural briefings. Cathari children were considered sacred by their society, and any harm that came to one could escalate the conflict beyond any hope of resolution. But at the same time, leaving the child exposed in an active combat zone went against every instinct Marcus had developed during his 12 years of military service. The decision was made for him when he heard the distinctive twang of Cathari war bows from the opposite end of the street. A group of traditionalist warriors had spotted the child and were advancing, their weapons drawn. But these weren't rescue forces. Marcus could see the ritual scarification on their faces that marked them as members of the Purifier sect. Extremists who believed that any Cathari who had been exposed to alien influence needed to be eliminated. The first arrow flew past the child's hiding spot, embedding itself in the stone wall with a shower of sparks. The little one let out a cry that cut through Marcus like a knife. It was a sound of pure terror and confusion. The cry of someone too young to understand why the world had suddenly become a place of violence and death. Marcus didn't think. His body moved before his mind could catch up, driven by an instinct that went deeper than training or protocol. He sprinted from his cover position, his boots splashing through the puddles that had formed in the uneven street. The Cathari warriors spotted him immediately, and arrows began to rain down around him as he ran. One arrow caught his shoulder plate, spinning him around but not penetrating his armor. Another grazed his helmet, leaving a smoking scar across the composite material. Marcus ignored the impacts and focused on reaching the child. The little Cathari was frozen in terror, her large eyes fixed on the approaching warriors who were now less than 30 meters away. Marcus dove behind the cart just as another volley of arrows struck the ground where he had been standing. Up close, he could see that the child was injured. A cut on her forehead was bleeding the silver blood of her species, and her left arm hung at an odd angle. She looked up at him with those enormous eyes, and Marcus saw something that transcended species barriers. The look of a child who needed help. "Hey there, little one," Marcus said softly, trying to keep his voice calm despite the arrows that were now striking the cart with increasing frequency. He didn't speak Cathari, but tone was universal. "It's going to be okay. I'm going to get you out of here." The child didn't respond with words, but she didn't try to run away either. That was something. Marcus quickly assessed their situation. The cart provided cover from the front, but it wouldn't last long under the sustained assault from the energy arrows. He could hear the Cathari warriors advancing, their voices raised in what sounded like some kind of battle chant. Behind them, more voices were joining in. This wasn't just a small patrol. It sounded like half the traditionalist force was converging on their position. Marcus activated his comm unit, hoping against hope that someone from his squad might be in range. Static answered him, along with the distant sound of explosions. The jamming equipment that Cathari had deployed was still effective. He was on his own. The cart shuddered as another arrow punched through its wooden side, missing Marcus's head by centimeters. The energy discharge from the arrow's tip set part of the wood on fire, filling their small shelter with acrid smoke. The child coughed and pressed herself closer to the human soldier, her instinctive fear of the approaching warriors overriding her natural caution around aliens. Marcus made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life, though not in the way he expected. He carefully set his rifle aside and gently picked up the child, cradling her against his chest with one arm while keeping his weapon ready with the other. The little Cathari was lighter than he expected, her bones feeling almost bird-like in their delicacy. She made a small sound of pain as he lifted her, but she didn't struggle. "Trust me, kid," Marcus whispered. "We're getting out of here." But even as he said it, he knew the odds were against them. The Cathari warriors had surrounded their position, and he could hear them coordinating their next assault. They would rush the cart from multiple directions, and even with his superior firepower, Marcus knew he couldn't hold them all off while protecting the child. The war cries grew louder, and Marcus could hear the scrape of metal on stone as the warriors prepared their weapons for close combat. He tightened his grip on his rifle and prepared to sell their lives as dearly as possible. But just as the first warrior appeared around the edge of the cart, something unexpected happened. A new voice cut through the battle cries, speaking in rapid, authoritative Cathari. Marcus didn't understand the words, but the tone was unmistakable. It was a command to stop. The advancing warriors hesitated, their weapons still raised but no longer moving forward. An older Cathari emerged from the group, his elaborate robes marking him as some kind of leader or priest. His 6 arms moved in complex gestures as he spoke, and Marcus could see that several of the warriors were actually backing away from their position. The leader's eyes met Marcus's across the battlefield, and for a moment, time seemed to stop. Then the leader did something that Marcus had never seen a Cathari do before. He placed all 6 of his hands over his hearts in what Marcus somehow knew was a gesture of profound respect and gratitude. The other warriors, seeing their leader's actions, slowly began to lower their weapons. The child in Marcus's arms stirred and spoke for the first time, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus didn't understand the words, but the leader's reaction was immediate and dramatic. All of his remaining aggression seemed to drain away, replaced by something that looked almost like reverence. "She says you saved her from the fire arrows," a new voice said behind Marcus. He spun around to find another Cathari approaching, this one wearing the more familiar robes of the diplomatic caste that humanity had been dealing with since first contact. "She says you put yourself between her and death, though she is not of your people." Marcus felt some of the tension leave his shoulders, though he kept his weapon ready. "I couldn't just let a child get hurt. It doesn't matter what species she is." The diplomat translated Marcus's words, and the reaction from the assembled warriors was immediate and profound. Several of them actually dropped their weapons entirely, and Marcus could hear murmurs running through the crowd that sounded almost reverent. "You have done something that will not be forgotten," the diplomat continued. "Among our people, there is no greater honor than to shield a child from harm, especially a child not of your own blood. You have shown that humans possess the same sacred duty that we hold most dear." The leader of the warriors approached slowly, his weapons lowered, but his posture still cautious. When he reached Marcus, he began to speak in his own language, the words coming fast and passionate. The diplomat listened intently before translating. "He says that he has misjudged your people. He believed that humans were without honor, that they cared only for conquest and profit. But he says that any being who would risk his life to save a child of another species possesses a soul worthy of respect." Marcus looked down at the child in his arms. She had fallen asleep despite the chaos around them, her small body finally relaxing now that the immediate danger had passed. Her injured arm would need medical attention, but she was alive and safe. "What happens now?" Marcus asked. The diplomat spoke with the warrior leader for several minutes before responding. "There will be a formal ceremony. You will be recognized as a protector of children, a title that carries great weight among our people. And there will be peace talks, real talks, not the formal exchanges we have had before. Your actions today have shown that there may be common ground between our species after all." As if summoned by the diplomat's words, Marcus could hear the distant sound of human aircraft approaching. His comm unit crackled to life as the jamming field was shut down. And familiar voices began calling his name. The rescue force had found them. But as Marcus prepared to hand the child over to the medical team that was surely part of the approaching force, she opened her eyes and looked at him. In that gaze, he saw something that would stay with him for the rest of his life, the absolute trust of a child who knew without doubt that this alien being would keep her safe. The child's name, he learned later, was Zarathea, and she was the daughter of one of the most influential families in the moderate faction of Cathari society. His actions that day didn't just save one life, they changed the course of human Cathari relations forever. The formal ceremony took place 3 days later after both species had established a temporary ceasefire. Marcus stood in the center of a vast amphitheater carved from the same crystalline material that made up most of Cathari architecture. Thousands of beings from both species watched as the High Council of the Cathari formally declared him a Shield of the Innocent, a title that hadn't been granted to an outsider in over 1,000 years of their recorded history. But for Marcus, the most important moment came when little Zarathea, her arm now healed by advanced Cathari medical technology, walked up to him and placed a small carved crystal in his hand. The diplomat later explained that it was a traditional gift from a child to their protector, a token that would mark him as family among her people for the rest of his life. Marcus kept that crystal with him through the peace negotiations that followed. Through his eventual return to Earth, and through his decision to leave the military and pursue a career that would keep him closer to the new frontier worlds where humans and Cathari were learning to build something together. But he never forgot the weight of that small body in his arms, or the trust in those large, luminous eyes. Some moments, he realized, change everything that comes after. And sometimes, the most important battles aren't won with superior firepower or tactical brilliance, but with the simple decision to put yourself between harm and someone who needs protection. The war that had seemed inevitable between humans and Cathari never came. In its place came something much more valuable: understanding, cooperation, and eventually, friendship between two species who had discovered that they shared more than they had initially realized. Marcus Chen returned to Earth a hero, but he carried with him the knowledge that the real victory that day hadn't been his alone. It had belonged to a small child who had taught two species that courage and compassion could transcend any barrier, even the vast differences between worlds. 50 years had passed since that day in the crystalline streets of Cathara Prime, and Marcus Chen was no longer the young soldier who had risked everything to save an alien child. His hair had gone silver, his face bore the weathered lines of someone who had spent decades on frontier worlds, and his hands, though still steady, carried the accumulated scars of a lifetime spent in dangerous places. He stood now on the observation deck of the human Cathari Joint Research Station orbiting Proxima Centauri b, watching the slow dance of construction ships as they assembled the framework for humanity's most ambitious project yet, a generation ship designed to carry both human and Cathari colonists to the Andromeda Galaxy. It was a symbol of how far both species had come in their relationship, a testament to the peace that had grown from that moment of crisis half a century ago. Marcus had retired from active military service 20 years earlier, but retirement for someone with his unique skills and experience was a relative term. He now worked as a security consultant for the Joint Colonial Administration, troubleshooting problems that arose in the growing number of mixed settlements scattered across human space. It was work that suited his temperament, complex problems that required both tactical thinking and diplomatic finesse, situations where his reputation as the human who had saved Zarathea still carried weight. His current assignment had brought him to this research station to investigate reports of sabotage attempts against the Generation Ship project. Someone, it seemed, didn't want to see humans and Cathari spreading their cooperation to other galaxies. The intelligence report suggested it might be elements from one of the extremist factions that still existed on the fringes of both societies, groups that viewed the growing alliance between the two species as a betrayal of their pure heritage. Marcus was reviewing security footage in his temporary office when his comm unit chimed with an incoming priority message. The sender's name made him pause. Admiral Zarathea Veltar, Supreme Commander of the Cathari Deep Space Fleet. The little child he had saved 50 years ago had grown into one of the most powerful military leaders in known space. They had maintained contact over the decades, their relationship evolving from protector and protected to colleagues, and eventually to something approaching friendship, though the formal nature of Cathari culture meant their interactions were always marked by a degree of ceremony. Marcus had watched from afar as Zarathea distinguished herself in the Cathari military, rising through the ranks with a combination of tactical brilliance and diplomatic skill that made her uniquely suited to work with human forces. The message was brief, but urgent. Marcus, I need your particular expertise. There is a situation developing that requires someone with your unique qualifications. Can you meet me on Kepler 442b? Time is critical. Z. Marcus frowned. Kepler 442b was a frontier world at the edge of human Cathari joint territory, a place where both species were attempting to establish their first truly integrated colony. If Zarathea was calling on him specifically, it meant the situation was both dangerous and delicate. He sent back a brief acknowledgement and began making arrangements for immediate departure. The journey to Kepler 442b took 3 days aboard a fast courier ship, and Marcus spent the time reviewing what intelligence he could gather about recent events in the system. The reports made for grim reading. A radical human supremacist group calling itself the Terra Liberation Front had somehow established a base on one of the system's outer moons and had been conducting increasingly aggressive raids against the colonial settlements. Their stated goal was to purify human space by driving out all alien influence, starting with the joint colonies. What made the situation particularly dangerous was that the TLF had somehow acquired military-grade weapons and equipment that suggested they had backing from sources within either the human or Cathari military establishments. Their most recent attack had targeted a school in the main colonial settlement, an act that had sent shockwaves through both governments and threatened to derail the entire colonial project. Marcus arrived at Kepler 442b to find the system in a state of high alert. Military ships from both species patrolled the space around the planet, while on the surface, joint human-Cathari forces had established a security perimeter around the colonial settlements. The atmosphere was tense. with both species' military commanders struggling to coordinate a response that wouldn't escalate the situation into something that could damage the broader alliance. He was met at the landing pad by a human colonel he didn't recognize, a young woman with the bearing of someone who had risen quickly through the ranks. "Sir, Admiral Veltar is waiting for you in the Joint Command Center. She asked me to escort you there immediately." The command center had been established in what had originally been designed as the colony's administrative building, a structure that reflected the aesthetic compromise both species had worked out for their joint settlements. Human functionality blended with Cathari artistic sensibility, creating spaces that felt neither fully alien nor fully familiar to either species. Marcus found Zarathea standing before a large holographic display showing the orbital positions of the various moons in the system. She had grown tall and elegant over the decades, her natural Cathari grace enhanced by the bearing of command. The ceremonial scars on her face marked her as a veteran of multiple campaigns, while the complex insignia on her uniform indicated her high rank in the Deep Space Fleet. When she turned to greet him, Marcus saw something he had rarely seen in their adult interactions: genuine relief. "Marcus," she said, using the informal version of his name that she reserved for their private conversations. "Thank you for coming so quickly." "Admiral," Marcus replied, matching her formal tone in the presence of the other officers in the command center. "What's the situation?" Zarathea gestured to the holographic display, which zoomed in to show one of the outer moons. "The Terra Liberation Front has established their base here, in the abandoned mining complex on Kepler 442b-7. Our intelligence suggests they have between 200 and 300 personnel, along with enough firepower to hold off a direct assault. But that's not the real problem." The display shifted to show a new image: a Cathari child, perhaps 8 years old in human equivalent, with the distinctive markings of the noble caste on her forehead. "This is Velana, daughter of Ambassador Trendar. She was taken during their last raid on the surface. The TLF is demanding that all Cathari personnel withdraw from the system, along with a guarantee that no further joint colonies will be established." Marcus studied the image, seeing something familiar in the child's features, the same large, luminous eyes that had looked up at him with such trust 50 years ago. "They're using her as a hostage to try to break up the alliance." "Precisely. But there's more." Zarathea's expression darkened. "Our intelligence indicates that they don't intend to honor any agreement. Intercepted communications suggest they plan to execute the child regardless, as a message to both our governments about the consequences of continued cooperation." Marcus felt a cold anger building in his chest. The same protective instinct that had driven him to action half a century earlier. "What do you need from me?" "Your particular skills," Zarathea said quietly. "The TLF base is heavily fortified, and any direct assault would likely result in the child's death. But there's a possibility for a surgical strike. One sniper, approaching from an unexpected vector, might be able to eliminate the key targets and create enough confusion for a rescue operation." Marcus nodded slowly. He had maintained his shooting skills over the decades, more out of habit than necessity, but he was no longer the young soldier he had once been. "You realize I'm not as fast as I used to be." "But you're smarter," Zarathea replied. "And more importantly, you understand what's at stake here. This isn't just about one child, though that would be reason enough. If the TLF succeeds in their goals, it could shatter the trust between our species that took 50 years to build." She activated a new display showing detailed scans of the moon's surface. "We've identified a position approximately 2 kilometers from their main compound that would give you clear sight lines to their command structure. The approach would be difficult. The terrain is rough and you'd have to get past their perimeter sensors. But it's possible." Marcus studied the tactical display, his mind automatically calculating ranges, wind factors, and escape routes. "What about extraction?" "We'll have a strike team standing by to move in the moment you take the shot. Their job will be to locate and extract the child while their command structure is in chaos. And if things go wrong? Zarathea met his eyes. Then a lot of people die, and everything our species have built together dies with them. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, studying the display and thinking about the weight of the decision before him. 50 years ago, he had acted on instinct to save a child. Now he was being asked to make a calculated decision that could affect the future of two civilizations. I'll need detailed intelligence on their guard rotations, technical specifications on their sensor net, and atmospheric readings for ballistic calculations, he finally said. Already prepared, Zarathea replied, producing a data pad. Along with your old service rifle, which I had the armory techs modify for optimal performance in this environment. Marcus took the data pad and began reviewing the information. As he read, he became aware that the conversation around them had gradually died down, and he looked up to see that most of the other officers in the command center were watching him with a mixture of curiosity and respect. Word of his identity had apparently spread. There's something else you should know, Zarathea said quietly. The child, she knows who you are. Her family are descendants of the clan that witnessed your actions 50 years ago. The story has been passed down through the generations. She specifically asked for the human who shields children when she was taken. Marcus felt the weight of history settling on his shoulders. 5 decades ago, he had saved one child and changed the course of relations between two species. Now he was being asked to do it again, under circumstances that were far more complex and dangerous. When do we start? He asked. The mission began at 0400 local time, with Marcus departing the orbital station aboard a stealth shuttle designed for covert insertion operations. The shuttle had been modified with both human and Cathari technology, representing the kind of cooperation that the TLF was trying to destroy. As they approached the surface of the moon, Marcus found himself thinking about the circular nature of his life, how events from half a century ago had led him to this moment. The insertion went smoothly, with Marcus rappelling from the shuttle onto the moon's surface at a point 15 kilometers from the TLF base. The gravity was lighter than Earth normal, which would help with his approach but would also affect his ballistic calculations. He had trained for these conditions during the 3-day journey, practicing with simulated firing solutions until the adjustments became second nature. Moving across the lunar terrain at night was an exercise in patience and precision. The TLF had scattered motion sensors throughout the approaches to their base, and Marcus had to plot a careful route that would take him through the gaps in their coverage. His age worked against him in terms of raw physical capability, but it gave him something more valuable: the patience to move slowly and methodically, without the impatience that might have driven his younger self to take unnecessary risks. It took him 8 hours to reach the position Zarathea had identified, a rocky outcrop that provided both concealment and clear sight lines to the TLF compound. As he settled into his firing position, Marcus activated his scope and began his final target assessment. The compound was exactly as the intelligence reports had described, a repurposed mining facility surrounded by defensive barriers and guard towers. Through his scope, Marcus could see the TLF personnel moving about their daily routines. They were well-armed and disciplined, more like military units than the terrorist rabble he had expected. That suggested they had significant backing from somewhere, which made the political implications of this mission even more serious. His comm unit buzzed softly with an encrypted message from the orbital command center. Target has been located in Building 7, Northwest Quadrant. Command structure identified in Building 3. Green light for engagement at your discretion. Marcus adjusted his scope and began identifying his primary targets. The TLF leadership was gathered in what appeared to be a briefing room in Building 3, their positions clearly visible through the facility's windows. A clean shot there would decapitate their command structure and create the confusion needed for the extraction team. But as he prepared to take the shot, Marcus found himself thinking about the child being held somewhere in that facility. Velana, descendant of those who had witnessed his first act of protection, now depending on his ability to do it again. The weight of that responsibility was almost overwhelming. Marcus steadied his breathing, felt the familiar calm that came with absolute focus, and prepared to change history once again. The shot that Marcus Chen fired at 1432 local time on Kepler 442b 7th would later be studied in military academies across human space as a perfect example of precision marksmanship under extreme conditions. The hypervelocity round traveled 2.3 kilometers through the moon's thin atmosphere, compensating for gravity differential, atmospheric pressure, and the slight rotation of the planetary body, before punching through the reinforced window of Building 3 and eliminating the TLF's commanding officer in a single, clean shot. The effect on the terrorist compound was immediate and devastating. The carefully organized routine of the facility dissolved into chaos as personnel rushed to respond to the unexpected attack. Communication systems lit up with confused reports and contradictory orders, while guards abandoned their posts to converge on the command building. In the space of 30 seconds, the TLF had gone from a disciplined military organization to a confused mob. Marcus didn't wait to admire his handiwork. The moment he fired, he was moving, breaking down his position and beginning his withdrawal to the extraction point. His comm unit was alive with reports from the strike team as they moved in from their concealed positions around the facility. The plan was working perfectly. The confusion caused by the loss of leadership had created exactly the opening they needed. "Strike Team Alpha, we have visual on the target building," came the voice of the team leader through Marcus's earpiece. "Moving to breach and extract the package." "Strike Team Beta, we have multiple hostiles converging on Alpha's position. Moving to provide suppression fire." "Orbital command to all units. We have additional TLF forces moving in from the outer perimeter. Timeline is now critical." Marcus increased his pace, using the rocky terrain to mask his movement as he headed for the designated extraction point 3 kilometers away from his firing position. Behind him, he could hear the distinctive sounds of human plasma rifles mixing with the energy weapons favored by the TLF extremists. The battle for the compound had begun in earnest, but even as he moved, Marcus found himself thinking about the larger implications of what was happening. The Terra Liberation Front represented something that went beyond simple terrorism or political extremism. They were the manifestation of an old human fear, the fear of losing identity through contact with the alien and unknown. It was a fear that had driven conflict throughout human history, from ancient tribal warfare to the colonial period to the nationalist movements of the 20th and 21st centuries. What made the TLF particularly dangerous was that they weren't entirely wrong in their concerns. Contact with the Cathari had changed humanity in fundamental ways. Human technology had been transformed by Cathari scientific insights. Human art had been influenced by Cathari aesthetic principles, and human society had been forced to adapt to the reality of no longer being alone in the universe. The children growing up in the joint colonies would have a fundamentally different understanding of what it meant to be human than previous generations. The question was whether that change represented growth or loss. Marcus had spent 50 years watching the transformation, and he had come to believe that humanity was becoming something better through its contact with the Cathari. But he understood the fear that drove groups like the TLF, even if he couldn't condone their methods. "Strike Team Alpha to all units." The voice in his earpiece brought Marcus back to the immediate situation. "Package secured. Repeat, package secured. The child is safe and unharmed." Marcus felt a wave of relief wash through him. Whatever else happened, they had succeeded in their primary mission. Velana would live, and with her, the hope that the alliance between humans and Cathari could survive this crisis. "Orbital command to strike teams, we have multiple TLF reinforcement units approaching your position. Extraction window is closing rapidly. All units move to extraction point Charlie immediately." Marcus checked his position and realized he was still over a kilometer from the extraction point. At his age, even in the light gravity of the moon, that was a significant distance to cover while under potential enemy fire. He pushed himself harder, feeling the burn in his legs and the strain in his lungs as he navigated the treacherous terrain. Behind him, the sounds of battle were intensifying. The TLF forces were regrouping faster than expected, and Marcus could hear the distinctive whine of their heavy energy weapons beginning to dominate the firefight. The strike teams were good, but they were outnumbered and operating in enemy territory. Time was running out for everyone. Marcus crested a small ridge and saw the extraction point below him, a flat area where the retrieval shuttle would land to pick up the strike teams and their precious cargo. He could see figures moving in the valley, taking defensive positions as they waited for the shuttle's arrival. But he could also see other movement, TLF forces approaching from multiple directions, moving to cut off the extraction route. His comm unit crackled with urgent communications. "Orbital Command, this is Extraction Shuttle Sierra 7. We are taking heavy fire from ground-based weapons, unable to maintain approach to primary extraction point. Strike Team Alpha, we have hostiles closing on our position from 3 directions. Need immediate support. Strike Team Beta, we are running low on ammunition. Can't maintain suppression fire much longer." Marcus realized that the extraction was falling apart. The TLF had recovered from their initial confusion faster than anyone had expected, and they were now throwing everything they had at preventing the rescue teams from escaping. In a few minutes, the strike teams would be overrun, and everything they had accomplished would be lost. He made a decision that went against every tactical principle he had learned in his decades of military service. Instead of continuing toward the extraction point, Marcus turned around and began moving back toward the compound. His rifle still had a full magazine, and his position on the ridge gave him excellent sight lines to the approaching TLF forces. "Orbital Command, this is Marcus Chen," he said into his comm unit. "I'm in position to provide overwatch for the extraction. Give me target coordinates." "Marcus, negative," came Zarathia's voice through the comm. "Your orders are to reach the extraction point. We can't afford to lose you." "Admiral," Marcus replied, settling into a firing position behind a cluster of rocks. "With respect, you can't afford not to use every asset available. I have clear sight lines to the hostiles approaching from the north and east. I can buy your people the time they need." There was a brief pause, and Marcus could imagine the quick conversation that was taking place in the orbital command center. Finally, Zarathia's voice came back. "Target coordinates coming through. Marcus, make it count." For the next 20 minutes, Marcus Chen became the guardian angel of the extraction operation. From his elevated position, he systematically eliminated TLF personnel who posed the greatest threat to the strike teams below. His shots were precise and economical, each round carefully placed to maximum effect, taking out squad leaders and heavy weapons operators while avoiding unnecessary casualties. The TLF forces quickly realized they were taking fire from an unexpected direction, but their attempts to locate and suppress Marcus's position were hampered by the confusion that still gripped their organization. Without their original command structure, they lacked the coordination needed to effectively respond to a threat they hadn't anticipated. "Strike Team Alpha, path to extraction point is clear. Move now." "Strike Team Beta, hostile suppression successful. Falling back to extraction point." "Orbital Command to all units. Extraction shuttle is inbound. ETA 2 minutes. Marcus continued to provide covering fire as the strike teams moved toward the extraction point, but he could see that his position was becoming untenable. The TLF forces had finally organized a coordinated response to his fire, and energy bolts were beginning to impact the rocks around his position with increasing accuracy. He had perhaps another few minutes before they would either flank his position or bring up heavy weapons that could eliminate his cover entirely. His comm unit buzzed with an encrypted message. "Marcus, this is Zarathia. The shuttle is on the ground and the package is secure. All strike team personnel are accounted for. You need to move to the secondary extraction point now. Marcus checked his tactical display and saw that the secondary extraction point was over 2 kilometers away across open ground. With TLF forces now aware of his position and actively hunting him, reaching that point would be extremely difficult. But staying where he was would mean certain capture or death, and neither outcome would serve anyone's interests. He was preparing to begin his withdrawal when his comm unit crackled with a new voice, young, speaking accented standard with the distinctive tonal qualities of the Cathari language. "Human Protector, this is Velana. I am safe because of your actions. My family will not forget." The voice hit Marcus like a physical blow. It was the same tone of absolute trust that he had heard from another Cathari child 50 years ago. The same faith that somehow, against all odds, everything would be all right because a human had decided to help. "Stay safe, little one," Marcus replied. "And remember, humans and Cathari are stronger when we stand together." Marcus began his withdrawal from the ridge, moving as quickly as the terrain would allow while still maintaining cover from the TLF forces that were now converging on his former position. The secondary extraction point was located in a valley that would provide some protection from ground-based fire, but reaching it would require crossing several open areas where he would be vulnerable to detection. The journey took him 45 minutes, moving from cover to cover, while TLF search teams combed the area behind him. Several times, he had to take detours to avoid patrol groups, and twice he was forced to eliminate sentries who had spotted his movement. Each shot increased the risk of detection, but leaving the sentries alive would have guaranteed his capture. When Marcus finally reached the secondary extraction point, he found it empty except for a single figure waiting beside a small, fast shuttle. As he approached, the figure turned, and Marcus recognized the distinctive ceremonial armor of a Cathari honor guard. But it was what the guard was carrying that made Marcus stop in his tracks. The Cathari was holding a rifle. Not just any rifle, but a weapon that combined the best of human and Cathari technology. The stock and barrel were clearly human in design, built for human ergonomics and firing characteristics. But the power systems and targeting electronics bore the elegant aesthetic touches that marked Cathari craftsmanship. "Admiral Veltar sends her compliments," the honor guard said in carefully pronounced standard. "She also sends this token of appreciation for services rendered to the Cathari people." Marcus took the rifle and immediately felt the perfect balance of the weapon in his hands. It was clearly a custom piece, designed specifically for his physical characteristics and shooting style. The scope was a marvel of hybrid technology that would allow him to make shots that would have been impossible with purely human or Cathari equipment. "This is too much," Marcus said. "I was just doing my job." "No," the honor guard replied. "You were doing what you have always done, protecting those who need protection, regardless of species or politics. This weapon is not a reward. It is a tool, crafted for someone who has proven worthy to wield it." The flight back to the orbital station took place in relative silence, with Marcus lost in thought about everything that had happened. The rescue of Velana had been successful, but the larger questions raised by the Terra Liberation Front's actions remained unanswered. There would be investigations, political repercussions, and probably more terrorist attacks as extremist groups on both sides tried to undermine the alliance. But there would also be children growing up in the joint colonies who would know from birth that humans and Cathari could work together, could protect each other, could build something better than either species could achieve alone. In the long run, Marcus believed, those children would be more powerful than any extremist organization. When the shuttle docked with the orbital station, Marcus was surprised to find Admiral Zarathea waiting for him in the docking bay, along with what appeared to be half the senior staff of both the human and Cathari fleets. As he disembarked carrying his new rifle, the assembled officers came to attention in a display of respect that transcended species boundaries. Zarathea approached him, and for a moment, Marcus saw not the powerful military commander she had become, but the frightened child he had carried to safety 50 years earlier. She spoke in the formal cadences of a Cathari military ceremony, but her words were clearly intended for both species present. "Marcus Chen, shield of the innocent, protector of children, guardian of the Alliance," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the docking bay. "On behalf of both our peoples, I thank you for your service. Your actions today have preserved not just one life, but the hope of peace between our species." Then, in a gesture that sent ripples of shock through the assembled Cathari officers, Admiral Zarathea Veltar, Supreme Commander of the Cathari Deep Space Fleet, slowly lowered herself to one knee before Marcus Chen, placing all 6 of her hands over her hearts in the deepest gesture of respect and gratitude known to her people. The silence in the docking bay was absolute. In 50 years of human Cathari relations, no Cathari of such high rank had ever performed such a gesture before a human. The political implications were staggering, but Marcus understood that this moment went beyond politics or protocol. "Rise, Admiral," Marcus said gently. "We stand as equals in service to something greater than ourselves." Zarathea rose, and Marcus could see tears in her large, luminous eyes, the same eyes that had looked up at him with trust and hope half a century ago. "Some debts," she said quietly, "can never be fully repaid, but they can be honored through a lifetime of service to the ideals that created them." As the assembled officers began to disperse, Marcus found himself thinking about the strange path his life had taken. 50 years ago, he had been a young soldier who made a split-second decision to protect a child. That decision had led him through decades of service, through the transformation of 2 civilizations, and finally to this moment, standing in a space station orbiting an alien star, holding a weapon that represented the perfect fusion of human and Cathari technology, having just saved another child and possibly the future of 2 species. The little girl he had saved had grown up to become one of the most powerful military leaders in known space. The child he had just rescued would grow up in a universe where cooperation between humans and Cathari was not just possible, but natural. And somewhere in the joint colonies, children of both species were learning that the universe was a place where someone would always be willing to stand between them and harm. Marcus Chen walked toward his quarters, carrying his new rifle and the weight of a life well lived. Behind him, the construction ships continued their work on the generation ship that would carry humans and Cathari to distant galaxies. Ahead of him lay whatever challenges the future might bring, secure in the knowledge that some things, the protection of the innocent, the bonds forged in crisis, the hope for something better, would endure across any distance, through any trial. The universe was vast and often dangerous, but it was also a place where a single act of courage could echo through the generations, where the decision to shield a child from harm could grow into an alliance that spanned the stars. And that, Marcus thought as he settled into his quarters, was a legacy worth defending.